The question is, do we trust it? Is it good enough? What do we do with it? Can we correct it? Are we going to apply today or maybe tomorrow or not at all? So it's, if you like, is the decision about what to do with the answers that seems to me entirely human and only human. That's where we stop delegating and we start being in charge.
The following is a conversation with Luciano Floridi, an Italian professor and philosopher at Oxford and Yale University, whose groundbreaking philosophy of information has reshaped our understanding of the ethical frameworks surrounding AI and digital information. I'm honored to have him here on Ethics Unveiled to share his insights and journey onto the future of technology. In an interview for the opening of the DEC, you stated that we don't study and comment on current trends, rather we want to be, if we can, the first to step into areas that are previously uncovered, unknown, and uncertain. How do you balance pioneering research in digital ethics and AI with the inherent risks of navigating uncharted territories, especially when the societal implications of these innovations are not yet fully understood by the public? And what safeguards or principles guide your explorations of these unknown or uncertain domains?
There are several bits of an answer that I can provide. I could start by saying that it's a bit of a trial and error. We I say we as a group of researchers, we try our best to identify issues that are significant, important, they're going to have consequences, but they have not yet been entirely explored, identified, understood in full. So there's the first part, the try and error. You try something, you see whether it works, you go back, you discover that something sometimes has already been fully explored and we didn't know. So we review a particular field and weeks later we realize that other colleagues have been there before, which is fine. Other times, same try and error, we discover that, yes, a topic has not been explored before, but it's also not so significant as we thought. So it's more marginal, and there is a reason why people have not been exploring it. Then there's a second component, together with the try and error, which is some experience. You've been around for long enough, and you start thinking, okay, well, this sounds interesting. Has the features of a problem that will become significant, highly visible in a short while. Now, what that experience is, it's very hard to tell. As anyone who has been around for a while doing something, and it's not just a matter of age, of course, years help. But if you've been doing something for some time, you know when things work, when they don't, when they are promising, when they're not. I imagine cooking something. You want to try a new recipe, you have some experience. You know that, for example, mixing, I don't know, say, coffee and salt is not a good idea. They don't go together. But maybe mixing coffee with chocolate, well, has worked in the past, and so on. So there is some good lessons learned from the past that can be applied to the future. Then there's a lot of third component, monitoring, research, reading, constantly scanning the horizon, so you get the signal earlier than sometimes it may happen. This means, for example, having strong relationship with the policymakers, the lawmakers, the decision makers, so socio-political context, strong links with business, research and development. So they may tell you, for example, before they actually produce something or they test something, that a service, a product is in the making. Or a policymaker might actually contact us saying, look, no, we are thinking about this legislation. What's your view? So you know before, and that's almost like cheating, because of course, how did you know that this was going to happen? Well, they told me earlier. And that's the fourth point, once you start doing this, so try and error, some experience, horizon scanning, knowing before other people, being in touch and in the making of things as they go. So normally, you know, before it hits the headlines, it makes sense, to add almost like a last point, which is in the cycle of transformations and changes and research and development, foresight analysis and so forth, being part of the group of people who look ahead and try to understand as early as possible, what problems might be coming our way is also a self-reinforcing cycle. In other words, you do it, the more you do it, the better you get at doing it, and so on. So this is a long answer to your very good question. Bottom line, you run some risks and sometimes you get it wrong.
Yeah, well, that is prone to happen, but you highlighted that the infosphere is rapidly changing. So my next question is that should we allow AI to arrive at moral conclusions independent of human programming, given that firstly, humans lack a consensus on fundamental values, and secondly, these values largely evolve throughout time?
There's anything wrong to have any system, AI today, other systems tomorrow, reach conclusions once we ask, for example, the right questions, so we put in the right principles and turn the handle, so to speak, and see what comes out. The question, I think, is more what we do with the answer we get. Do we like it? Do we agree? Do we use it? When do we use it? Do we just throw it away saying, look, this is garbage? Or is like, oh, this is interesting, actually, I hadn't thought about this. Or, for example, we can correct it, say, yeah, almost right, but you know what, on this particular thing, complete hallucination. There is no UN legislation on, say, large language models has been invented by the, say, bot on the spot. So I would say more than should we ask questions is about what do we do with the answers and what questions we want to ask. Let me give you an example. The amount of principles that have been produced on AI is huge. And sometimes they just repeat the same points in different words. For example, should we ask the usual bot, I don't want to make any particular name, but no, the usual things that we use all the time, to, for example, give us a harmonized view of those principles and which principles seem to be more recurrent and therefore more influential in the principled analysis, ethically speaking, of AI. Well, we could do that. The question is, do we trust it? Is it good enough? What do we do with it? Can we correct it? Are we going to apply today or maybe tomorrow or not at all? So it's, if you like, is the decision about what to do with the answers that seems to me entirely human and only human. That's where we stop delegating and we start being in charge.
And as a follow-up question, I know you've cautioned against cherry picking admirable traits to program, but if we do, how should we manage scenarios where AI develops a moral system that conflicts with human interests? So, for example, an AI that was tasked to mitigate climate change comes to the conclusion that humanity itself should be eradicated in order to preserve other species.
Yeah. Yeah, first of all, I think that it would be very good for the environment if we were not on this planet. We could all migrate elsewhere. I'm sure the planet Earth would be grateful. That goes back precisely, it's a good question because it goes back to the sort of trade-offs that only intelligence, and the only intelligence available at the moment is human, and for the foreseeable future. Only intelligence can draw by having a clear understanding of all the things that are at stake. For example, I mean, one typical movie scenario, should we start using AI more intensely? We already do, but even more intensely, increase the amount of AI that we use in crime prevention. Maybe, but we have seen what happens. Normally, we target the same areas of the city, the same sort of postcode, the same segment of the population gets over scrutinized. Monitoring happens only about some people, some corners of the urban environment, and we know what happens afterwards. Discrimination, unfairness, reinforcement of patterns, vicious circles. So we stop. But if the AI said, look, this would solve the crime, said, you know what, we know better. No, it wouldn't. It would just make things much, much worse. So trade-offs, meaning how you put together two things that, or more, not a number of things that are initially incompatible. So there has to be now give and take so that you get an equilibrium. It's a fine art, and it's an art that requires a lot of intelligence and as many tools we have. So I would like to conclude by saying we can use all this to get more chances of opening up our minds to solutions that we haven't seen, understanding trade-offs that we didn't even imagine. But ultimately, the evaluation of all this requires a lot of reflection, understanding, deep knowledge of the consequences of human nature, of the kind of society you would like to live in, and what should happen and should not. And that's entirely, part of the human project, if I can use that expression, which I've been using for some time, that is entirely ours. So yes, by all means, let's use all the possible tools. But ultimately, what kind of a world do we want to live in is our choice, and it would be silly to delegate it to a machine.
And it's fascinating that the question you ask, what kind of world would we want to live in, is more of a philosophical question than it is scientific.
Yeah.
Should AI be treated as a moral agent capable of reasoning or as a moral patient subject to human intervention?
I'm not sure either of them would fit. We could use it more like if you like, information-based advisor, to which, and I didn't say to whom, but I said to which on purpose, we can ask to provide more solutions, expand our menu of options. I have in mind chess playing as a good case where you use a lot of AI to expand the options that you may want to consider, and perhaps explore corners that will require a huge amount of computation in order to see exactly what happens if I make some moves. But ultimately, what opening I'm going to choose, what kind of game I want to play, more aggressive, less aggressive, safer, happy with no kind of, as long as I don't lose, or with whom I'm playing. I might be playing not with some friends, or with a child, or with a great champion. So imagine in that context using AI to as a sort of well-informed advisor that can provide all the bits of information that otherwise we would never be able to invent, discover, imagine, design. Then we have much more freedom. We have more options. We can choose more, and we can choose more informatively. I think that that is where we can see the human machine sort of interaction at its best. Patient or agent, I'm not so sure. I think that would be the wrong framework, in my view.
For a switch of questions, I really enjoyed reading on Medium your series of notes to myself. Really
Thank you.
short pieces, but very insightful. In your Notes to Myself series, you've expressed frustration with the inevitability of dying before understanding everything one seeks to know, a profoundly human and, we can say, epistemological resignation. How do you reconcile the acceptance of the limits of human knowledge with your ongoing pursuit of truth or progress with your work and research?
And that's a deep one. In a way, and those are the days where I'm less happy with what I'm doing and who I am. There is no way of reconciling that. It's it's almost like saying, why do you keep breathing? I can't stop. Uh, so do you think that breathing is something that you want to do? That's your goal, your end, your final. It's hard to tell because I don't know what it would mean to stop. So thinking, trying to understand the world, making a bit more sense of at least a little corner of this immense mystery that is life and the universe is often feels to me like I cannot help doing it. So other times I enjoy it and I embrace it. So it's more like maybe breathing becomes less of a good example. It's like drinking. So sometimes if you're thirsty, at some point you have to drink some water. So, but other times you want to have a good, say, a glass of cold Coke, and it's very enjoyable as opposed to something else. So you embrace the drinking of, say, whatever the soft drink after a run as also as a pleasure, as something that you enjoy, you embrace, you want to do it, you look for that particular brand, for example, and or a glass of wine, for example. I think it's a mix between necessity that you cannot avoid and a drive that you embrace. And depending on the days, trust me, sincerely, human being to human being, some days you embrace it with passion and belief. And some other days you just do it because you can't help doing it. It's like breathing and drinking some water once you're thirsty. It is a requirement. It's not a choice. I enjoy the days when I embrace it, no, willfully and with passion. The days when I'm doing it because I cannot help not philosophizing, those are more painful.
We're not really accustomed to a life where breathing and drinking water are not what we do every day. And philosophy, a lot for me, is just something not separated from real life. A lot of people assume that philosophy is just notebook, just textbooks and
Yeah.
philosophizing in classrooms, but it applies to everyone outside of the classroom and to everyday beliefs. And I have one final question. Your work often explores profound conceptual shifts brought on by the information revolution. Have there been moments in your career when a breakthrough in research fundamentally altered not only your professional perspective, but also your personal worldview or ethical stance? And how did this transformation influence your subsequent work?
Yeah, actually, those are the best moments when they often feel like an enormous struggle before, and once you get whatever, I'm not saying once you get the truth, but once you get what to you feels like, this is it. No, the moment of eureka, I found it. It looks totally trivial. It looks like, how did I not see this before? It was so obvious. It was like, no, glasses on my nose. I was looking for them and I desperately looking everywhere and I was like, oh, here they are. So there's this, that, no, also about your previous question, this double feeling of pushing and searching and trying to understand. And then once you get there, like, oh man, it was so silly. It was so obvious. Like, there. So I had many of them. It doesn't mean that they are profound thoughts. May or may not be. It doesn't matter. But they are sort of perspective changing when they happen to you. It's like, okay, I see the world really differently now, completely differently. So very, very recently, for example, I can tell you the most recent one. I'm trying to understand. So it's part of a book that I'm not sure I will ever be able to write, but because it's too big, too ambitious, too everything. So I could actually call it the two book, TOO book. But if I will ever finish thinking about that, one piece is this, which is actually honestly, once you think about it, like, yeah, no big deal. So I was thinking about the end of modern philosophy when you meet great philosophers. Now you probably met them often. On the one hand, there's Wittgenstein, on the other hand, there's Heidegger. And I was trained as a student, as an undergraduate, but even in high school when we did some philosophy, but especially as an undergraduate, to think in terms of both of them as the quote unquote fathers of contemporary philosophy. So, and oversimplifying, continental, analytic. But essentially, two major lines of development, starting with these two philosophers. And recently, I just realized, like, I don't think so. I think that they are the end of modernity. They're not the beginning of anything. They're more like the final firework of modern philosophy that ends with Wittgenstein and ends with Heidegger. And that explains to me, but again, just to me, I don't want to impose this to anybody, why we don't have a major big philosophical movement these days. something that sort of really speaks to society, to the world, to the environment, to people, as it did in the past. Because essentially, that big push for modern philosophy, which was foundational in the case of Wittgenstein, and it was more sort of theological in the case, sort of open sense of theological, in the case of Heidegger. Had in both of them more like, as I said, the ultimate firework, like boom, 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 boom. And after that, there's been sparks of what was left over, but there hasn't been anything more. So that was a moment for me of point of no return. I don't see them anymore in the way I used to see them when I was, or even just a few years ago. And so, if anything, I know there will be a chapter in that book where I will try to reconstruct these two great philosophers as the end of modernity, not the beginning of contemporaneity, which leaves the question open, like, okay, what kind of a new philosophical narrative do we need today? Which is that's why it's too big a book to write. If I were a better philosopher, I would have an answer. But at least I know that much that that road ends with them. It doesn't begin. And that's why a lot of the post-Wittgensteinian and post-Heideggerian philosophy is just the kind of philosophy that you described before. It's textbook, it's a discussion, it's got nothing to do with real life. It's an internal discourse of philosophers with philosophers about philosophers' problems. What I call elsewhere scholasticism doesn't speak to the world anymore, which, they did, both of them, but they were the last ones, not the first to do something that we could carry on. Anyway, so then it was an example of what you were asking me. Yeah.
Philosophy is not as groundbreaking as Socrates, but perhaps looking forward, we might actually look back to the past or antiquity and see how those philosophies can apply to this day. But ontology is coming back in philosophy, isn't it? It's a huge field.
It is, but we can't do it as we used to do it. Now, every great philosophical new chapter in the history of philosophy has been a rethinking from scratch of the past in view of the future. And if we don't do that rethinking, we just try to do more of the same, we will just be passing on the flame, but we will not be innovative. And I think that the revolution we are undergoing as we speak, this 21st century, really is a turning point historically that deserves a turning point philosophically. It's almost like the world has changed page dramatically in terms of climate change, social injustice. Look at democracy today in the United States. I mean, what's happening? Look at the rest of the digital revolution as we know it in terms of education, AI, the previous question. This is so profound as a break, historically speaking, that it would deserve a philosophical sort of understanding and planning, thinking in terms of what we want to achieve of equal magnitude. Instead, we have more of the same coming from, as I said, the Wittgensteinian, the Heideggerian kind of traditions that seem to be doing a little bit more of the same, but they're playing chess, okay? No, philosophical chess. Amazing players. I mean, super smart, very deep, etc. But it's a game. If you haven't read the book Hermann Hesse, I don't know if it means anything to you. Yeah. So the game of the glass pearl, I think that's the English translation. I would recommend it. It's this special group of people who are totally engrossed in this sort of intellectual game, and they lose sight of what the world is like. Now, that's an example. Anyway, I'm wasting your time. Sorry, but thank you. I mean, it's fantastic questions. I don't know if there's anything else. Sorry, I didn't want to cut you short.
Oh, just a short one. Advice for the everyday person or even high school student who wants to contribute and spread awareness about the digital revolution and to be informed.
Oh, that's a good one. I think maybe a combination, more like a recipe with some ingredients, so to speak. Read the classics. They're classics for a reason. Don't waste your time with the the New York Times top 10 or the most recent prize winners. Often, no, we will find much deeper and better ways of understanding our condition and therefore our predicament and what projects we can put in place by reading some not robust classic. And there are not many. I mean, like those 20, 30 classics out there, philosophically speaking, but also in terms of literature. I think that would be certainly a suggestion. The other suggestion, which seems to be a contradiction, is don't read too much. Think more. Mm. Stop looking for answers prefabricated, thinking that someone somewhere has already provided the answer. All I need to do is to find it. No, whatever search engine, whatever AI, not true. To quote Augustine, no, you have to go back into yourself and search the truth inside yourself. And if you do that reflection, whatever you gain, you will never lose it. Whatever truths you gain, you will have gained them through a huge effort. It's something that you have acquired internally and you own because you made the effort to get the questions and the right answers. That will be with you forever. Anything else? Wikipedia. I mean, I can just check online. But nurturing ideas through some classics and having at the same time the effort of investigating without being affected too much by the fashion, the idea today, the article tomorrow, the TikTok, the whatever next thing is going to be available, blue sky included these days. That is priceless. Unfortunately, I see too many people reading the wrong kind of stuff and constantly looking for pre-digested, prefabricated answers. That kills you because it doesn't stay. You don't develop yourself and you don't own the answers. They are someone else. You're borrowing thoughts from other people. They don't stay. They don't get roots into your sort of mind. So that will be some suggestions.
Thank you. I cannot stress the importance of coming to the conclusion by yourself, and it's something that I want to stress in education in high school primarily to encourage students to come to their own conclusions. Thank you so much for your time.
This has been a pleasure, and good luck with your studies.